All right, good morning, everyone. So I have a new web camera, so I'm going to be filming these videos a little bit differently. What I'm going to kind of do a demo of is just the basics of using this program, so that you can use it as a reference if you're studying for the certification or if you are just trying to maybe get started with it and you're not sure where to begin. So this is going to go over some things with like scene design, some different elements about how to implement scripts, do some very simple animation. So it's going to cover a little bit of everything. So I'm going to start with the Unity Hub. Depending on your access, if you're a student, you likely have an education license. If you are a personal user and you're just learning the program for the first time, you're going to have a personal license. But in order to use Unity, you do have to have a license, and everything moves through this Unity hub. So, what I have right here is just all of the projects that I've done over the course of this school year, but in some cases, it's going to be a little bit longer. It just depends. But this is where all of the projects are stored. If you don't want to see a project, maybe you have one that you've been working on but it's not something that you are currently wanting to use, you can go here and you can just have it removed from the list if you want. But keep in mind that doesn't remove it from the computer. It will just remove it from the hub in case there's some things that are you need to access or you have a few different projects. So if you wanted to open a project, you can just click here. This is the one that we're going to be using as our demo. But if I want to start a new project, I would go up here and then I would pick my template. So when you see this, and I'll make this screen a little bit bigger, there's the essentials pathway. So again, if you're getting started with Unity, I'd recommend going here. There's tutorials that are included. But for the most part, you're going to be using this core sample. And so the core has, again, you have a universal 3D, which is kind of what I'm going to be going with. That's what Unity seems to be moving towards overall. So they're getting rid of the built-in pipeline. But with the universal pipeline, it's the one that's easily scalable to like mobile devices or a lot of different systems or consoles or PCs. Um, and so it's a really good option. And like I said, they're getting rid of the built-in. You also have the HD one, which is right here. The HD pipeline is going to have, if you're going to have very detailed and realistic graphics, this is the one that you're going to want to use. These are both scriptable, so you can edit and change things about them. If you go to the, you'll see here that there's a built-in pipeline. This one is getting kind of phased out over the next few years. It has the least customization options in terms of scripting, so there's not much you can change about it, but it does have a lot of great things for you. Like if your computer maybe is running a little bit slower, or if you're doing some very simple kind of like gray boxing or white boxing, which just means that you are, kind of prototyping. This one tends to run the best on like default PCs. This is usually where I kind of start projects. And then later, once I've got some sort of the basics down, I move to one of these pipelines. Okay. But since we are not going to open up a new project, I'm just going to go into this one. What you'll do is you'll click right here and then your project will open. Again, be patient. It does take a bit, especially if you're creating a new project. Sometimes it can take a little bit of extra time. So just be patient. Don't try to open a bunch of things at once. And you can see right here, what'll happen is you'll see a Unity engine window pop up. It'll look like this, and then it'll run through the process. So I'm going to pause it while it opens, and then I'll go into the next section. All right, so this is what the Unity editor looks like. So when you load into a scene, and again, it somewhat depends on which pipeline you're going through. So if you have built-in, you're likely only going to have a camera and you're only going to have a directional light. The global volume, something that's kind of unique to the universal render. If you are in built-in, you will not see this, at least in Unity like 6.3. 6.4 has come out recently, which I have not used, so this might be slightly outdated, but this seems pretty consistent across the years that I've used Unity. And then in the HD pipeline, again, you're going to see some different options as well because again, it's kind of specific for a different purpose. So some other things you're going to notice are you're going to have a volume here, which is your scenes. Okay, you're going to have the settings, which again is going to be a little bit more unique to the universal render pipeline. There is a tutorial here if you wanted to try it. Again, you can see in this option it has the README scripts and some different things. You have an input system, and then you have some documentation for the universal render pipeline, which again is specific to the universal render pipeline. So what I'm going to just give an overview with is how you import things, how you add things, and just some different aspects with scenes. I'm also going to show you over the course of this video how to do a very quick animation, just so you can see that pipeline, how to add packages and some other different things. So the first thing you're going to do when you're designing a scene in Unity, and this is not, again, importing stuff from other software, is if you go to this plus sign, you're going to see all of these options. You also could go up here where it says game objects, and you can create them here. But I don't really use this. I mostly will use this. So if I go here, I'll go to my 3D object, and I always kind of start with a plane, which is going to be just like your floor. Okay. So you have this object here. Now, this is your basic standard 1 by 1 by 1 size. And I'm going to illustrate one other thing here, which is if I go to 3D object, I'm going to add a cube. And then I'm also going to use a capsule, which is what we're going to use for the script. Now, you'll notice an important part is that this plane is 1 by 1 by 1, this capsule is 1 by 1 by 1, and this cube is 1 by 1 by 1. All right, so what this means, which is important, is that every one of these objects is a standard measurement of itself. So there's no like in some programs you have like your meters and you have you can change it to be like the metric system or you can change it to be the imperial system. But in this case, these are the measurements of themselves. So if you see like here, if I change the scale to 2 by 2 by 2, this is what it would look like. So it's not adding like another meter or another inch or another foot. It's just doubling the size essentially. So a couple of other things you can do is when you have objects. So I have this object that's right here. I have a capsule that's here, and you'll notice that I can move it along this axis. So the way that Unity works, and I'll just kind of show you here, this is your camera. And if you go to this game view, you can see that this camera is at this position. I can put it here, and the easy way to do this is if I hit reset, it's going to look like this. So now I've put this camera here. I'm going to go ahead and undo that by hitting Control Z. But it's important to know this because when you are moving an object, this is your x-axis, and it's sometimes easier when you start your scene to look at it like this. All right, so when I go into my scene, this is technically what I'm seeing. So if I wanted to move my object more to the right based on what the camera sees, then I would do something like this. I would follow along this axis here. Okay, so I have this scene. Again, I have these objects. If I wanted to resize them or move them, I have this element over here, which is like your transform tool. So this kind of changes the camera. I can look around, I can drag. I can also hold the middle mouse button or the scroll wheel, and I can see all of these, like I can just move around. If you hold, so if I hold like this, hold the Alt key, and then I can rotate around the object like this. Okay, so there's a few options with that as well. Um, so there's some good ways to move around scenes, and as you get used to the software, like you'll have a good idea of like what works best to move around. If I need to center on something, like let's say I want to go to the plane, I can double click it and it'll zoom in on it, just like this cube or just like this capsule here. So those are some options as well. So kind of practice moving around the scene. Okay. So this is your, like I said, this is your view tool that allows you to move around like this. You can also use this move tool, which lets you move the object up and down like this. You have a rotate tool. So if I wanted to move this along an axis, you can see here that I can rotate it, and I'll zoom in some so you can see it a little better. Okay, so I have this. I have a scale tool. So if I wanted to make an object like a little bit bigger, then I can also do that, right? Now, this tool allows you to adjust the size, but just in a 3D game, I don't use it very much, to be honest. Mostly if I'm resizing things, I'm either typing these measurements here. Ideally, you want to keep them kind of uniform, but again, that's up to you. And then the last one, it has all of them at once. I never use this, just because I end up picking the wrong thing and then I have to go back and resize. So if I know I need to change something, I just go in here and do this with each of the tools. Okay, so I'm going to go back, and you can, again, I'll just move this like this just so you can see it. So having this perspective is important. The script that I'm going to be using really is just about moving this as like a first person controller, which is what I'm going to demo, but that's how this element works, at least for moving it. So typically, when you're looking at your camera, you should see something kind of like this. Again, I've just kind of done some basic moving around of objects. I can add some more too if I wanted. So I can go 3D object. I'll go ahead and add a sphere. And there it is. Again, you'll notice it's one by one by one. You can see here if I'm moving, it's moving along this axis like this. Um, so if I'm moving on the x-axis right here, this red one, if I'm moving on the z-axis, it's back and forth. And then this is your green, which is the y-axis. Okay, so some other things just to help us with like our asset management is you're going to use this quite a bit just to keep this hierarchy clean, so to speak. So if I do an empty game object, I'm just going to call this shapes. And the point of this is when you have different elements in your game, sometimes like if you have this big list of stuff, it can get difficult to find things. So let's say you have like a list of coins, like in your level. Instead of just having this big list of coins that goes all the way down, you could make an empty game object and then you could call it coins and then put them all in this folder. And so that does a couple of things. Not to move ahead too much, but let's say I needed to add a script to a group of objects. If I have them all in this area, then I can just distribute it across them by putting the script here instead of one and then doing the next one and then doing the next one. So besides like looking a little bit better, it also helps to have it be, you can distribute things across different shapes or different objects or whatever it is that you have in your scene. Okay. Another thing that becomes important is just, of course, knowing what windows do what. So this is everything that is in this scene, which is right here. Okay, this is your scene view. You'll notice, again, this is what the camera sees versus this is the entire scene. And then if you click on an object, this is what's called the inspector. So the inspector just tells you all of the details about the object. So if we look at this capsule, we can see its position in the world. So if this is our point of origin, 000, this is where this object is currently located. Okay, same with the sphere. And you can see the mesh that's on it. You can also see if it has a collider. Any default shape in Unity is going to have a collider. And so that's how that element works. And this is basically the entirety of using this program, to be honest with you. This is what's in the scene. This is what, like the list of objects in your scene. This is what is in the scene. So you can see a visual representation of it. And then these are the properties, so to speak, of this object. When you go here, you're going to see these folders. And this is not only the stuff that comes into the program, but you can also create new folders. So if you right click, you can go to create, and then you're going to see this option that says folder. And I'm going to call this materials because that's going to be the next thing that I add. Okay, I'm also going to make a folder called prefabs. And I'm also going to make a folder that is called scripts. And so when you're building your project, this is all of the stuff associated with a project. So sometimes everything that's in this scene is also in here, but a lot of the times you're going to have multiple levels, for instance, in a project. So a scene, an easy way to think of it is like a level. So I may have things that are in this project, but they may not be in this specific scene or level. So when I do materials, again, maybe some of the prefabs, and if you're not familiar, a prefab is just basically a reusable object. If you put an object into this folder, you can then just drag it into a scene and it will just replicate that object as it is. So I'll show you a really quick example of that. The first thing I'm going to make is a material, and this is what goes over an object. You can think of it like if you put, an easy way to think of it is if you put like a blanket over an object and you can see like it changes its color essentially. So if you right click, you can go to create, and then you'll see this option here that says material, and I'm just going to call this, for the sake of like demonstrating prefabs and like off the management of files, I'm going to call this enemy. And then once I've made the material, I can go in and I can pick my color. You can do a lot of options here. Again, you have your, if you have a color that you like and you know the hexadecimal code, you can enter it, or again, you can just kind of view it right here. So I'm going to pick this sort of light green color. And then what I'm also going to do is make an enemy object really quick. So I will use a cylinder because it's a shape I haven't used. And then the way to add materials, you can do this a couple of ways. And this applies to adding anything to an object. In the scene view, I can drag it on. You can see like live, it will change the color of the object. All right. I don't use this because what happens a lot of times is if I try to do this, you can see like it sort of changes wherever. So when you add things like scripts, you don't have the visual representation. So typically, I will either add it like this, or if I hit Control Z, I can undo that step. I can also, if I'm clicked on the cylinder, I can also, well, normally you can, you can see like right here, you should be able to add it, but it's not working. So I'm just going to add it to this like this. Okay. All right. Now that I have my cylinder, I can rename this object and I'm going to call it enemy like this. And then if you go into your prefabs, I can now drag this here. And this is the big advantage. You'll see that this has changed its color, so it's this sort of blue typing. And then if I drag it in, now I can just drag a bunch of these objects in, and it has the same properties. So I don't have to keep adding materials and anything like that. You can add scripts to stuff, and then in this mode, it will change it. Now, another cool thing about this is if you double click on it, you see how it's highlighted like this. Let's say that I wanted to change something about it. Like let's say I wanted to add a shape to it. So I will add a cube. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place this. I'm going to kind of scale. And again, I'm just sort of eyeballing this just to make it a little bit easier. I'm going to scale this in some. And then I'm going to move this right there. So something like this, again, make it kind of easy. And then I'm going to, you see how it's automatically like this sort of prefab. I'm going to try to center it some. And so now I have this in, it's what's called prefab mode. And so the idea is anything that I change here is also going to change to every object that's in the scene. So I'll make a new material for this. I'll pick this sort of red color. I'm going to drag it on. And now when I go into my scene, you can see that it changed all of them at once. So prefabs are kind of what made Unity what it is. It makes it really easy. Like if I have a bunch of objects already in a scene that are prefabs, then I don't need to go in and change each one of them one by one. I can just change it in this prefab mode, and any instance of this object that's in the scene is going to change, which is awesome. It saves you a ton of time. Okay, just going into some other asset management stuff. I'm going to go in and make an empty project or an empty game object. I'm going to call these enemies. And then what I can also do is I can just take all of these. If I click the first one, I'm going to hold shift and then it will highlight all of them. And then I'm just going to put them in here. And so now you can see like this looks a lot more manageable. If I need to go in and change something, I can. Another kind of cool thing is, let's say I wanted to make one enemy slightly different. I can just do this to this particular one instead of in prefab mode like this. Now, if I wanted more changes to this prefab, I could go in and do that really easily and then add scripts and different things like that. But I'm going to kind of leave it there. Okay, so that's a lot of the asset management that sort of goes into using Unity. Some other things that you might see, that you will be using is the asset store. So I'll show you how to access that really quickly. If you go to Window, you're going to see this option here that says Package Management and then Package Manager. And then it's going to open up this list. So two pretty common ones that I use are, if you go to the registry right here, you'll see this is all of the stuff that Unity might offer, but it's just not kind of included in the basic system. Pro Builder is one of the biggest ones that I use. So if I go to install right here, it'll install this program that allows me to sort of draw more complex shapes if I want to. So things like stairs, pyramids, that type of stuff. The other thing that's important to note is if you go to My Assets, which is right here, you're going to see all of the stuff that you might have added from the asset store. So for instance, one thing that I use quite a bit is like I have these different third person scripts and stuff, but this is one that I use quite a bit, this terrain sample pack. And again, once you have it, you just hit import and then you can add some of the things that go with your terrain, like different textures. If there's lighting packages that you might have downloaded or material packs, like there's tons of different stuff that you can use. So that is, again, this is an overview of the basics of managing and using assets. Again, if you have a script, you would have put it in the scripts folder and then you would be able to kind of move it from there. But a lot of using Unity is managing the different elements that you're going to use in a game. If you want to import something, like maybe you have a file that you've downloaded, or maybe you've built something in Blender or Maya, the way to do that is you can either go up here and go to Assets, and then you can go into import new asset. I don't usually follow that. I right click in the project window, go to import new asset, and then I find the file that I want to import. If you have a Unity package, which sometimes they offer, if you right click, you can do import package, custom package, and then you'll find the Unity file, right? And then you'll see all of that here. So as an example, let's say I want to make a new scene. If you go into your scenes folder, right click, you can do create, and then you can go into scene. Then I'm just going to call this level 2. And now it'll ask me to save. And then this is your new scene. And you can have as many scenes as you want. This is your default scene, which is right here. Then this is your level 2. If there's things that you want to add, so again, if I have this right here, and I go to my prefabs, I can still add it, which is the advantage of having like the prefabs folder in the projects. I don't have to make anything new if I don't want to. The folders and assets that you make when you make a project, you can easily move them into other projects. So it's an important element of like saving time. Once you've built things, like you will tend to reuse them a lot. So that is, again, the basics of asset management. We'll go into designing some more like terrain and adding the scripts and different things and elements like your lights in the next video. But I hope that this was helpful just to get you started in designing some basic shapes and some level design in Unity. And I'll see you in the next video.